Today, I wanted to do a plant that was actually something that Jaden has asked about a few times. I hope that he calls in, but if not, he'll be able to watch it later. Uh, the plant of the day might be one that you've all heard of too. It's probably one that you've seen, called Creeping Charlie. So I'll get started with the presentation. Since there's only the two of you right now, feel free to just unmute yourselves and ask questions. You don't, even if I don't see you, no, it's no problem because there's just the three of us. So before I get started, does anybody want to tell me anything about Creeping Charlie? Have you ever heard of this plant before? No? No, not really? Okay. It has lots of different names, so we'll go over that first. It is commonly known as Creeping Charlie, Ground Ivy, Gill over the Ground, Alehoof, Tunhoof, Cat's Foot, Field Bomb, or Runaway Robin. The ones that I have heard most commonly used are Creeping Charlie and Ground Ivy, although I've also heard Gill over the Ground. I think these other ones are maybe used in Europe, or were more commonly used a long time ago. But these are all the names that I found, and it's good to know, or at least try to remember, oh, I've heard that before, that sounds familiar, even if it's not the common name that you're used to. So this over here is our botanical drawing. It's an old one, and this shows you the general anatomy of the plant. I'm going to go back to our first slide. Does anybody want to tell me about this family that we have talked about very often? Sure, Liv, go for it.
It's the mint family, right?
Right, it is. So Lamiaceae is this, we keep talking about it. It's a word that you're going to get sick of. It's a family that you're going to be like, oh, come on, this one again. But it is so common in among medicinal plants and cooking herbs that we use really often. And it's also common amongst wild plants and weeds. It's just a very, very common family. And does anybody want to tell me about, maybe while we're looking at this drawing here before we get into other photos, does anybody want to tell me what reminds you of other plants or other things in the mint family that we have talked about so far? Maybe relative to this photo, or just like things that you can think about that we've learned about the mint family in general. Go for it, Liv.
It kind of looks like a chickweed plant a little.
Sure, there are certain things about it that are that could remind you of chickweed. Chickweed is a lot, if you saw them both next to each other, you would see that chickweed is generally a lot smaller. The leaves are much smaller. And chickweed is not a mint. But what about the way that the leaves are coming off of the stem here?
Oh, they have, they're at like the same place but opposite.
Exactly. Yeah, they are opposite. So they're like symmetrical. They're at the same location on the stem, but they're opposite one another instead of like varied in their heights. What about the flowers?
They look like cone-shaped almost, because it looks like it goes here and then out.
Yeah. So do you remember what the word Lamiaceae means, or lamia?
No.
It means mouth or lips. So the flowers have this kind of like mouth shape, They also have, what can you tell me about the stems of mint plant? Do you know? Go for it.
They're squared.
Yes,
And
they're square. Yeah. Yeah, great. They're square instead of round. What do we know about mint? Why do people love the mint family for medicine and tea and cooking herbs so much? Elliot or Elephant.
Um, it smells good and it tastes good.
Yeah, exactly. Smells good, tastes good. So the reason that these plants smell good and taste good is because they have really strong volatile oils, really strong smells that when you like kind of squish them, when you touch them or you like crush them or cut them at all, this aroma will just like explode out at you. And a lot of plants, plants all kind of have a smell, but the mint family is like very, very strong smells that a lot of people can smell from really far away, and creatures that have better noses and better senses of smell have the ability to smell them from really far away. So just gonna look at this little, hey Baron. We're doing a plant today, Baron, called ground ivy or creeping Charlie. And it's in the mint family. So we're doing another little review of what the mint family is all about. So this is just a photo from a website that I like a lot called Botany in a Day. There's a book also called Botany in a Day that teaches you all about patterns in families. And the mint family is really large. It has 7,500 species in it. There's so many plants. But they have these, like Liv said, they have these opposite leaves. They have square stalks. The flowers all generally kind of look the same. They have these like mouth-like shapes. They form seeds that mature into a capsule down at the base of the flower once the flower falls off. And they all have really, really strong smells. The ones especially that we know most commonly are very, very strong, flavored and scented. And whoops. So these are, it's kind of a out of focus photo, sorry. So it has pretty fuzzy stems in addition to its square stems. Creeping Charlie has a little fuzz on its stems and on the undersides of its leaves. Its leaves are a little bit fuzzy in general. It has pretty little but beautiful purple-ish, pinkish flowers. Most commonly, it has those colors. And this here, this stem actually looks a little bit different than this other stem. So it's important to know that there are so many, these plants are so common in so many different environments throughout Europe and North America especially, that there is a lot of variation in the colors of the stems, the colors of the leaves, the size of the leaves, the height of the plant total has a lot to do with the growing conditions, with the soil where the plant is growing, how much sunlight it gets, how much competition there is with other plants. So what do you guys think if a plant had, if a creeping Charlie plant had a lot of sun and a lot of moisture and didn't have a whole lot of competition, how do you think it would look as compared to if it had poor soil, not a whole lot of water, and a lot of shade? Anybody want to take a guess? Go for it, Elephant.
I don't think it would look super good.
You think you don't think it would look super good? Is that what you said?
Like healthy.
If it was in what kind of soil?
I don't really know much types of soil, so
I mean, like, if it's in good soil, what would it look like versus if it's in, like, poor soil?
if it was in good soil, it would probably look more healthy.
Sure.
And if it was in bad soil, it would probably look less healthy.
Cool. Cool. Yeah, that's a good guess. Does anybody else have any comments about that? Thoughts about what the plant might look like depending on what conditions it's growing in? It's fine if you don't have guesses. Yeah, Liv, go for it.
The one that's in better condition will probably get like bigger because it has more resources. So, yeah.
Sure. Great. Yeah. So, some of the variation is in a lot of the main variation having to do with better nutrients and more sunlight has to do with the height of the plant. So a lot of times the leaves kind of stay the same size, but the stems can grow anywhere from, like, it's called gill over the ground or creeping Charlie because a lot of times it's very low to the ground, maybe just like an inch or two off the ground, and it's just kind of like trailing along. But in certain conditions, it can grow to about 20 inches high, which is almost 2 feet. So that's a really large difference, a large variation in the size or the height of the plant. That's important to know about, and I think really interesting. I think it's really cool to see how plants grow differently in different environments. And that's why we want to learn like a bunch of different patterns about them, a bunch of different ways to identify them, so that we don't get confused. So here is another review that we've learned about with some other mints and with strawberries. We've already learned about these words. Does anybody want to talk about what these words are, stolons or rhizomes, or what's going on in this picture? Anybody have ideas? Sure, go for it, Liv.
I remember you said that they were called like runners because like one plant will like if you like drop a little tiny bit of the plant, then it will grow a new plant from that, and then it will continue to do that, and then that plant will do that, and then that plant will grow another plant.
Yeah, so that is a really good example. So there's a couple things that you talked about there. So the one thing, runners are kind of like what you have going on here. This would be, say, your first plant, the first plant that showed up in soil somewhere would shoot out above the ground a runner. So it's basically like a stem that is just crawling along the ground. And then where that hits the ground at a certain point, a stolon forms, which would basically be like the node that hits the ground and becomes leaves and stems and roots under the ground. And that will then become a new plant entirely. Even if you cut the runner off, this will be able to survive on its own. You also mentioned like dropping a piece of a plant or accidentally maybe like burying a piece of a plant that gets detached from another one. And that's definitely talking a lot more about rhizomes. So the roots of a lot of plants are, especially things that are considered really weedy, if you accidentally drop a piece of the root or the rhizome into the ground, it can just grow a whole new plant just from that tiny piece of root. So this plant itself grows from these runners and these little stolons, a lot like strawberries and a lot like the mints that we talked about the other day, chocolate mint and spearmint, do this a lot. But this plant also reproduces from seed very easily, which a lot of plants, other plants don't. Sometimes it's like one or the other. Elephant, you have a question or comment? I keep forgetting to turn off this ability for y'all to draw on it. Elephant, you have a question or comment?
Do you remember that time you taught us about grafting?
Yeah.
I think that one of my plants in my backyard did that.
Can you explain a little bit what you mean by that? What do you think happened?
I had this pretty purple and yellow flower plant thingy that we only planted in like one spot, and then it like moved and then like another one of those plants grew in a different spot.
Okay, well that sounds to me like it probably were they like kind of far apart from each other?
Mm-hmm.
That sounds to me like it's a plant that self-seeded. So when I say self-seeded, I mean the plant flowered and it set seed, and then the seed blew onto the ground somewhere nearby and regrew in the same, because it likes the soil there. Grafting is a concept. Grafting takes more human. Humans have to make grafting happen. Essentially, like you would have had to take a piece of one plant and graft it or attach it onto a piece of another plant in that case. Does that make sense?
Because my plant, it was like in my garden bed, and it like moved all the way to like the part like right beside the road.
Do you know what the plant is called?
It's a type of violet. I think it's called a Johnny Jump Up.
That makes sense. Yeah, I bet it grew from seed. It probably dropped seeds nearby, and then you got new plants. If it's a type of violet, violets do that all the time. They spread pretty easily, and they like all sorts of different kinds of soil. That's cool. I'm glad you noticed that. So this is a little bit more about why it's called Creeping Charlie or Gill Over the Ground or Runaway Robin or Ground Ivy. It is not related to English ivy at all, but it grows a lot like English ivy. It just like takes over. So this is a picture of a lawn. You can see some grass in here, but basically the whole space has been taken over by Creeping Charlie. And a lot of times you see this. It grows really easily. If you mow over it doesn't care. It doesn't kill the plant. In fact, it's probably kind of good for it. It will probably the plant will probably like thrive in those conditions, because if it gets cut down, it will have like chemicals sent out to like grow even faster and spread harder. So people a lot of times really don't like this plant. I personally think it's pretty great. And you just have to be careful about how much you let it take over. But in terms of like crazy weeds that take over that you can't get rid of, I feel like this is one that's really not that bad, because it doesn't get very tall. So it doesn't shade out other things, and it has some pretty cool benefits to it. Elephant, you have another comment or question?
Kind of like bamboo, because in my yard, I had bamboo, and the bamboo kept on spreading, and we cut it down, but now it's just popping back up again.
Bamboo is really, really hard to control, and it's kind of the opposite of this that I'm talking about, because bamboo can get really, really tall and really, really big around. So yeah, once you have bamboo in a place, it's definitely really hard to get rid of. You have to do a lot of work to eradicate it. It's in the grass family, just like a lot of other plants. So it spreads. Grasses all spread pretty crazily, especially if they're perennial. That's another thing about this that I haven't mentioned, is that Creeping Charlie is a perennial plant, so it will come back year after year. It will keep spreading itself. Its roots will survive over the winter. So that's another thing about why it spreads so easily. Does anybody want to take a stab at what this word means? We talked about this when we were talking about other mints the other day. And you can just like say it out loud and tell me. I'm gonna go to Baron. It looks like Baron has his hand up.
It means that like I can like it has the white on the leaves. Like it's
Yeah.
green and white.
Yeah. So the word is variegated, and it's just a fancy way to say varied, essentially, or like various. So it means that the leaf colors are varied. The leaf colors are more than just green. And sometimes that means red, but most of the time it means this like yellowish white color. It means that the chlorophyll that gives the plant leaves, or the whole plant, its green color, is absent or dormant in part of the leaf. It's pretty interesting, and it just happens kind of by accident. But then plant breeders, people who are looking for, unique varieties or different types of plants, will just isolate this and then try to keep growing this out. So, and once again, this is the Latin name over here, Glechoma hederacea, and this is the cultivar name. The like variety name is Variegata of this particular plant. So this is a plant that escaped out of people's gardens. Creeping Charlie is something that people really liked to plant in their gardens or plant in pots or sometimes in like hanging planters, and they would like trail over the ends of their hanging planters. But because it's so good at reproducing itself and it can tolerate so many conditions, it escaped into the wild and got out of control because people weren't controlling it well enough or keeping it in its place. So this is one particular variety that people were planting, or people do still plant as a garden plant, and it will sometimes take over and get out of control. So I want to talk a little bit. There are, even though it's not native to the United States, it is so common here at this point that it's essentially considered naturalized, which when you say something is naturalized, it means like it's not native, but it's so common that it essentially might as well be native at this point. It's been here for so long. So there are a lot of pollinators. There are a lot of native bees that really like these plants, that really like mint family plants in general. This is a photo of the hairy-footed flower bee, which I think is super cute. And there's some other really great bees. This is just a short list. There was a really long list of Latin names of bees that I saw, and these are just the first few. I didn't get to all of them, but these are some: the European wool carder bee, hairy-footed flower bee, the blue mason bee, and the pinewood mason bee. All really like Creeping Charlie as a plant to get pollen and nectar from. Elephant, question, comment?
I think I've seen one when this person was giving away plants. We got 2 strawberry plants and a bamboo plant and one other plant that I don't know what it was called, but there was still a Creeping Charlie left.
So you think you saw it when you were getting free plants from someone else?
Yes.
That makes sense. Yeah, it's still, I'm sure it's still pretty common amongst some people. And that's one of the things that I think is so funny, so interesting about humans and about plants, and how some people can't stand this plant. There's like websites that are completely dedicated to killing Creeping Charlie, to getting rid of it, to spraying pesticides on it, to get it out of your lawn. And then there are some people who are like, oh, I love this plant. I have it all over my garden. Do you want some? Here, would you like to buy some? So, you know, there's just so many different people out there, types of people, and people who are interested in so many different types of things, right? If you love grass and it's taking over your lawn, you're going to be really upset about it. If you don't necessarily care about a lawn and you like a bunch of different variation or simple, like short ground covers that you don't even have to mow with a lawnmower, then you'd probably love this plant. And if, you know, if you care about having flowers for pollinators, it's a good one for that. So it's interesting. You know, there's so many different people out there. So this is where one of the reasons why some people love it so much is we get into the food and the nutritional and medicinal benefits of the plant. So this over here is I just took this as like a screenshot over here from, and it's a lot of reading from a website earlier, but I think it's a really great little breakdown of this plant. So just as and it's also like a good review of what we've talked about already. So these are the common names for those of you who weren't here at the very beginning, some of the common names, and some of these I didn't even say earlier. Hay maids, I've never even heard of that. And the part used for food or medicine, medicinally speaking, the entire above ground part of the plant. So this word aerial here means anything that's growing above ground. It means the stems, the leaves, and the flowers can be used medicinally. This is I wanted to talk about it today because this is a really good time of year. If you're going to make medicine or food with this plant, this is a good time to do it. It still is in flower if any of you have it around you. So the flavor of it is, I think it's actually kind of bitter. It has a really strong and, to me, a very unique smell. If somebody brings me this plant, or if someone mows a lawn that has a lot of creeping Charlie in it, I can smell it immediately. If I have, you know, if someone were to like bring me the tea of it, I can smell it in there. To me, it's something that I've never smelled in another plant. And some people say that it has a minty smell, but there's such variation in the smells, in mint type smells, that I feel like that's kind of hard to understand. It's got kind of a bitter, it's very strong, bitter, strong smell. But it tastes, it's often used as like a salad plant, a salad herb. You wouldn't eat an entire salad of just creeping Charlie, but you could add it to a salad with a bunch of other mixed greens. So does anybody, oh yeah, and it used to be used to make, to brew beer in Europe a lot before some other more common plants started to be used in it. And that's part of the reason why it has some of the common names that it does. Does anybody want to take a guess at what some of these words mean in where it says key actions? These are really important and pretty difficult words to remember, but if you're learning at all about herbal medicine, these are very common ways of talking about plants. So I think it would be good for us to start talking about some of them that we don't know. Does anybody want to take a guess or take a guess at one or more of what these words over here mean? Go for it, Liv.
I think that antibacterial and antiviral probably mean that it'll like protect you against bacteria and viruses. And like, yeah.
Great. Yeah, exactly. So the word, this part of the word anti just means, you know, against. It fights against or fights off or wards off these things. So anti-inflammatory, that generally means that it helps with swelling, and that can be external or internal swelling, inflammation in your body. Anti-allergenic, that sometimes that word sometimes the word that you see, anti-allergenic and antihistamine, are pretty similar words. So these are things that mean that they help to fight against seasonal allergies. So it's if you have pollen allergies, this is a plant that a lot of times will help people. And it's how I know, actually, how I use it most commonly, is giving Creeping Charlie or telling people about Creeping Charlie as a way to deal with allergies to pollen, so around like this time of year. So another word that I think is really good to know is this word expectorant. Has anybody ever seen this word before? You can just raise your hand. The word expectorant. So a lot of times you will see it if you're like in a pharmacy, or a pharmacy section or CVS or Rite Aid or something. Expectorant means it's usually on cough medicine. So expectorant is something that helps to bring up like mucus or like any stuff that's like in your upper respiratory tract if you have a cough. And it also, so it can help to aid your cough, and it can also help to bring up all that stuff that you're trying to get rid of if you have a cold or allergies or flu or bronchitis. So it can be used as it's good as a respiratory herb. And it's also good for your digestive system because it has that bitter flavor. So you can see all this stuff down here that also is uses that is, makes a lot more sense that go along with these key actions. Does anybody have questions or comments about all of this stuff we have on this slide? Yeah, Liv.
How does it help with lead and mercury poisoning and joint and muscle pain?
Sure, that's a good question. So joint and muscle pain would be mostly its use as an anti-inflammatory. Lead and mercury poisoning, that's actually a really good question, and I should probably look that up. So it probably, this word here, tonic, I know that it is used by some people as for the circulatory system to help with cleansing the blood that's like running through your body. And lead and mercury poisoning is something that I believe gets into your circulatory system. It also might deposit itself in your other like kidneys and your liver. And this is supposed to be an herb that really helps with cleansing your circulatory system and your urinary tract and your digestive tract. So a tonic is something that helps to kind of like cleanse your entire body, or maybe particularly one part of the body. But that's probably why, if you drink it in a tea, especially if you drink it a lot in a tea, it's probably helpful to cleanse heavy metals out of your body for those reasons. Does that make sense? Cool. Another thing that I think is interesting is that it helps with this tinnitus, ringing in the ears. That's something that's fairly common amongst older people or musicians, and I'm friends with a lot of musicians, so it's something that I've also told people about as far as that is concerned. So this is just a lot of what I already talked about. It's good for swelling in the eyes if you have, and that's a lot of times like hay fever and people with allergies have like swollen eyes too when they're like really, really having a hard time with things. The word diuretic means that it helps to cleanse your kidneys and your urinary tract. It helps to like rid your body of excess water. It's good for cleansing you that way. I wrote this, I spelled this wrong and I wrote it twice, but astringent is the word that I meant to write. Astringent means that it's like drying. So that goes along with it being diuretic. Let's see. Oh, and it helps a little bit with headache, which I think is also related to it being a tonic and being good for allergies. So I'm pretty sure that's the last slide I have. Oh, the last slide I have is this one. A lot of the reasons that people don't like it, besides it just taking over lawns and people not liking that, is that it's toxic to livestock. So like cattle and horses, when they eat it, will get sick. But I think in general they avoid it. So when cattle and livestock are avoiding this particular plant because it's not good for them, that means that it keeps taking over because they're eating other things instead, if that makes sense. So a lot of times people who have large grazing animals, they have problems with this plant because it will take over and it's not good food for them. But it is very safe. It's safe for children. So that's important for you all to know. Elephant, question, comment?
No,
No?
I accidentally did that.
It was an accident. Okay. So this is my last slide. We have about 3 minutes left. Does anybody want to see other pictures or ask other questions? Yeah, Liv, go for it.
Is it like a plant that has like spirally leaves? Because if so, then I think I've seen it.
Spirally leaves. Do you mean like as it grows along the ground? Do they spiral?
I don't know, but in some of the pictures it looks kind of like a spiral. Not in those ones, but the last one it really does.
So this one here?
Yeah.
So you mean the way that it's like growth pattern kind of having this like circular, like the way my mouse is going, like this?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean it can grow that way. Once you see it, you'll have trouble unseeing it. It's one of those plants that I didn't know about it for a long time, and then once it grew. This was a plant that was growing underneath and around a ton of plants in a garden that I was taking a lot of care of, a small orchard space. And it didn't really bother me, but it was literally everywhere. And you pull it up and it just keeps coming. It just keeps like, it's all of those like runners and stolons just keep like you can like follow it for, many, many feet. So it might have kind of a spirally look to it because of how it just has this growth pattern of moving out and out and out. But I think it's especially important that you look at the leaves and then you examine how it's growing along the ground, and you can crush the leaves in your fingers, and the smell is like it's just got a pretty intense smell, if that's helpful. We have less than a minute left. I don't want us to run out of time like we usually do. But if you have other questions, feel free to ask me tomorrow. It was good to see you all today. Elephant, you have a question? We might get cut off.
Can we learn about bamboo one day?
Sure, I can add it to our list for sure. I will. It's a good suggestion. All right, y'all. I'm gonna go for the day. It's good to see you. I'll see you tomorrow. We'll have an extra class tomorrow because I missed the other day. Okay?
Bye.
Bye. See ya.